Greetings and welcome back to the show, World War II Books Where to Start. I'm your host, General Douglas MacArthur. My friends call me Sir. My wife calls me the General, and I wish FDR wouldn't call me at all. Today we're going to do some lesser-known memoirs. CBI, Pacific Theater specifically. Thought I'd dig up some of the non-standard stuff for a change. Not all of these are great, but if you want to dig deep and go sideways on the memoir scene, some of these might be of interest to you. One of these actually probably isn't obscure or lesser well-known, but lesser well-known to Americans, although some of you in my audience have probably read it. So with that mysterious introduction, here we go. First off, Carrier Pilot by Norman Hanson, originally from 1979, reissued electronically in 2016. Norman Hanson, born about 1914, and I don't have a death date for him, Royal Navy carrier pilot. He was a civilian, started war. He's 26 years old and volunteers for the Fleet Air Arm to do his bit and get into the scene. And so we get a lot of training. We get the Seafire stuff. He's missed the Battle of Britain. So it's kind of, and he's missed the Bismarck stuff by the time he gets operational. So it's kind of in the humdrum period. He doesn't get posted to the Med for a while. There's a lot of training. And drinking. And that's going to come up again and again. And that's a major problem with this book. He eventually gets posted to the Med as a filling courier pilot or a catch-all pilot, flying full Mars and whatnot around the Middle East, courier jobs, transport VIPs, bring the mail, whatever, but not really any combat. And when the Royal Navy transfers from Seafires and Sea Hurricanes to Corsairs, there's a lengthy training session in the States. That's kind of interesting for his transition to American life and what he thinks of it, and especially in the Deep South. Couple adventures with women and booze. Again, the booze just keeps coming up and coming up and coming up. If I remember right, there's a section where he's doing some high altitude aptitude testing to check your reactions in a depressurization chamber. There's like 140 cadets in here or whatever, and they're all required to do a test and pass the bar of do this test, do that test, or simulate you at 20,000 feet, 25,000 feet, yada yada yada. And he posts the highest score ever seen by any instructor and gets pointed out for it. He thought he had done something wrong, but they thought he had cheated. He had broken the test so bad. So that's kind of one of the high points of the book, because from there on, it's kind of downhill. This is regarded as a great memoir by a lot of reviewers. And I don't understand why. It's got a blurb on the cover. I don't have a copy or a picture to show you right now of, I want to say, some big British author saying this is the finest memoir ever written for Royal Navy pilot. I mean, what the heck are you seeing here? Because I'm not getting it. He is smart enough to lead off with combat itself. Disastrous day on the Illustrious, I think it is, in the Pacific, when the Kamikaze crashes the party and body parts go flying everywhere and there's blood dripping off the bulkheads. He's smart enough to lead off with that thunderbolt before he drags you back into the mire of the humdrum of all the stuff that led up to that point. And there's a lot of humdrum. There's after the Med, he gets transferred to Africa as the Royal Navy's fleet decides we are going to do our bit in the Pacific, whether Admiral King wants us to or not. But there's more training down in South Africa. There's a lot of barnstorming, some stunt flying over the city, an attempted court-martial for almost killing a general. Oopsie doopsie, we didn't mean to do that. But they settle it with a drink. Oh, that's cute. It's warm and fuzzy. We get several details about the bar bills and how the bar system worked for officers aboard Royal Navy carriers. It's ridiculous. By the time you get to the carrier raids that they did carry out against Sumatra, I couldn't care anymore. This should have been subtitled How I Drank My Way Through the War. So I don't know where all the reviewers are going, ooh, wow, this is really insightful and impactful and the best I've ever seen. I don't get it. From my jaundiced, cynical, bitter, sometimes bitter viewpoint, I'm missing the party here. I really am. So it's a very limited value to me, but I thought I'd pass it on as an obscure memoir that you may run across, and if you really like carrier naval aviation, you're a completionist, this might be for you. Okay, then we'll move on to the not so obscure one, or the one y'all might have heard of. Quartered Safe Out Here by George MacDonald Fraser. He's a Brit. Born in 1925, passed away in 2008. This was published in 92. So looking back on his life kind of thing, after his retirement, he had a long, fruitful, productive life, issued on Kindle in 2007. It's also on audio. And again, if you have any affinity for audio, this is one you might want to check out, although the narrator's voice and accent is so sharp and pronounced that it may throw you off and give you a bad sensation. One of my friends that tried to listen to this said he just couldn't do it. The accent was too sharp and biting and too cynical for him. He just couldn't hang with it. I think it's the appropriate tone because MacDonald Fraser says a couple times during the text that he is a reactionary, and he knows his time has passed him by and the world has moved on, and he's looking back at his past life and what it meant, and looking at today's generation, and he is not amused at all at what he fought for Great Britain and what Great Britain turned out to be, especially in the Thatcher years. There's some kind of disconnect there that really snapped him bad, and it inflects all the way through the memoir as he flashes backwards and forwards on his societal views, especially about the idea of PTSD and don't you ever feel any guilt, or don't you have bad dreams? Like, no, I didn't. We didn't think like that back then. We didn't act like that. PTSD, what are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. It happened. It's war. He's just very upfront and brutal, punched in the face about it. I'm not going to cry for you, is his basic bottom line here. I'm not going to cry for you on camera to get the emotional reaction you want out of me. Sorry, move along. So he's in Burma. He's a corporal. He's been busted a couple times back down in private. He's made it back up to corporal, and he has dreams of being a commissioned officer. And here he is in Burma at the ragtag end of the war with Indians and Gurkhas and a hodgepodge of Britain's cast-offs and overage soldiers swinging down to try to eliminate the Japanese with General William Slim's great offensive in the spring of '45. We get bad weather, we get snakes, we get all kinds of insects. We get this lizard that he calls an up-you bird because it sounds like it says up you every time it makes its noise, which is hysterical. We get people falling down a well on accident. Well, not on accident, trying to get some water, and a firefight breaks out. And the ultimate small unit squatties, all the guys and all their little habits and mannerisms and little sayings that get on each other's nerves and are repeated endlessly. He's got the squad life down to a T. And he lived it for 6 or 7 months, and it's just pitch perfect. And every minute is a hoot, I think, in here. It's a fantastic 5 stars. If you haven't read this, you need to, especially as a little bit of an insight into the CBI and what it was for the British and what it meant to them for pursuing the war. And he says, your viewpoint in the infantry is so restricted that it just doesn't matter. You don't even know where you are. If somebody handed you a map, you couldn't find yourself on a map. And when some officer runs outside on May 9th or May 10th, say, "Hey, the war in Europe's over," everybody just looks at him like, "What the hell do you mean? Why do we care? We're still here." It's just a really big insight into that world and that restricted world, and being 5,000, 7,000, 8,000 miles from home, what your life boiled down to. The next cigarette, the next foxhole, the next 10-mile hike. I don't think you can beat this. It's unmatched in its cynicism and its exquisite 2020 vision on what fighting the war was and what fighting the war wasn't and what it meant later on. I should also add that in his post-war life, he became a novelist, writing a series of books called the Flashman novels. And if you get a gander at some of these covers, you can see that the time period, and it reminds me also of John Carter of Mars and some early James Bond book covers. That style of what we would call today extremely sexist, macho man, toxic masculinity, it would be the phrase today, kind of cover art that is passé and extremely un-PC nowadays. But it's kind of funny to look back at it. You would see a whole rack of these in a bookstore and not even blink at it. You know, it was just so prevalent. But Flashman, White Man in India, Having Adventures is what I boil it down to. I don't know if I want to search one of these out. It's probably pulp style and maybe not readable, but amusing to know about. And he was also the screenwriter for the 1973 version of The Three Musketeers, believe it or not. He was a journalist after the war and ventured into novel writing and screenwriting. So he had a full spectrum literary life, shall we say. I can't say enough about this book. I've read it twice now. It's beyond phenomenal. I wish I had another word for it. Exquisite, perhaps, or phantasmagorical. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely got to be on your TBR list. That is Quarters Safe Out Here by George MacDonald Fraser. And then we have Commissioned in Battle by Jane Gruenfeld with Todd DiPestino. This is from 2011. So it's late in the day. He was about 80. He was in his high 80s when he wrote this. At least the postscript says he was. 87, I believe. 1924 was his birth date. I do not have a death date for him. I presume he is not among us anymore, but I couldn't find any information to tell me yes or no on that. Commissioned in Battle. So he is a private. He was born and raised in Chicago, suburbs or outskirts of Chicago during the Great Depression. Is of Scandinavian, Norwegian stock, and lived the great outdoors. He was given an air rifle when he was very young. He earned enough money later on to buy his own real rifle. Loved hunting squirrels and rabbits, that kind of Great Depression era thing, where these boys lived unsupervised in the country and became really great shots, and it put him in good stead for the military service. He did some ROTC stuff in college, did not rush off to enlist right after Pearl Harbor. He took his time, wanted to get some college under his belt, if not the whole degree. He figured he'd be called in and didn't want to rush into it. He wanted to mature a little bit. It was a very strange decision for most folks. They ran right down to the recruitment office that very minute, but he held off, thinking he had other stuff to do first that was, that would make him a better soldier when he was eventually called. And in 43, he is called up, and having that ROTC training, he was put in line for an officer's commission, but turns it down. He's instead made a sergeant, shipping off to the Pacific. And there was some screw up with his papers. He was already embarked. Some little form the Army wanted hadn't been filled out properly, so they held him back. And if he had made that original training, he would have been shipped to Europe. And he said his chances for survival would have been much less. And he's pretty frank about it. He says, I would have probably been killed. There's seeing the chances I took in the Pacific, I would have done the same in Europe, and I'm pretty sure I would have been killed. So he gets shipped off to the PTO instead for a long training session, because campaigns are so long in coming because of the logistics involved and distances. You spend a lot more time training, waiting your turn for combat and the PTO than you did in the ETO. So he is in New Guinea, he's in Australia, he's somewhere else, some other island, some other French colonial island, Noumea maybe, before he ever gets into the real thing, which is the Philippines. He does all his combat there. He lasts 6 to 8 weeks or something like that, 2-3 months, something like that. It's a very short period. And he's commissioned in battle because of the normal attrition you have amongst officers in that scenario, and gets booted up kind of against his wishes, but he's first asked and then later on told to go on down and get sworn in. You're a lieutenant now. So this guy is different. He is built different. You got the expert badge in weapons training, rifle, BAR, and pistol, I believe. He qualified for all of them. So, and he's dedicated to it. He says, I'm a professional soldier. I'm not afraid of the enemy. I want to go do my best. I want to be a leader, and I want to kill Japanese. He's very, just flat about it. And he's got a table in the back of the book of all his confirmed kills. 14 of them he can swear to that he got. He does not count the Japanese he blew up the caves with grenades one day. He blasted like 9 or 10 different caves, and he was the grenade thrower, the best in the squad, so he did almost all the grenade throwing. That had to add 20 or 30 more bodies to his count, but for whatever reason, he doesn't really consider that an actual kill. He's just talking about his rifle shots. And he's very clinical, almost like a doctor at some points, about how he takes his shots and, you know, gauging range and reflection and possible bullet drop for extreme shots. It's kind of unsettling. It reminds you more of a Vietnam era soldier's kind of psyched out approach than a World War II guy. It's kind of unique for World War II guys, aside from snipers. And there's a bunch of German sniper memoirs I haven't gotten to yet, but I think they will take the same approach. He could have been a sniper in Korea. I think he would have been. But here he's just a squad leader or a platoon leader. So he's just very matter of fact about killing Japanese. He's got maybe a particular hate of them at times, but not the visceral, ongoing 24-hour day thing that you see, again, from a lot of soldiers' memoirs from the Pacific. So it's very detached. I'm tempted to say it's kind of sociopathic. He's just so detached about living and dying. Even his buddies in his squad or his platoon that he says he's close to, you don't really get that sense. You really don't. He's got a really big emotional wall around everything. And again, it kind of harkens back to MacDonald Fraser. He's not crying about anything. He's not, woe is me. Even the nights he spent, you know, sheltering in a foxhole with artillery coming down. He said artillery is the worst thing in the world you ever want to experience. And we were shaking in our boots the whole night. But you can't tell it had any like real impact on his viewpoint or lifestyle, or gave him the shakes later on when he thought back about it. It was just one more experience. What he does get riled up about is friendly fire from close air support, which of course was in its infancy and very hit and miss. No pun intended, it just was. And the friendly fire casualties really got him riled up. So he's got a few tart words to say about the Army Air Corps in that respect. He didn't last long. He was wounded against going against the objective of the Ipoh dams or something dam outside of Manila. They wanted to keep the Japanese from coming back and trying to retake Manila. Of course, the Japanese have tens and tens and tens of thousands of soldiers in the hills, and you have to say their resistance is very disorganized and very discombobulated, running into pockets of the guys here in caves, here in the open with machine gun. A couple guys here just wandering down to a river for a drink. There's no sense of organized military action aside from the Japanese artillery that barks up every once in a while and causes a lot of casualties, including a classic that you would see in a lot of war movies. Get a bunch of officers gathered together on a little hill, conferring and pointing at a map. Boom, they're dead. So that's that's a cliche in movies, but it did happen. So aside from that, the Japanese are just targets of opportunity. They're almost like rabbits and deer out there that he's gonna hunt down when they pop up in front of him. Doesn't have much good to say about Filipino guerrillas either. He's not too thrilled with them, except when they haul his ass out after he gets wounded. Then they're A-okay. So overall, this is one of the strangest memoirs I've ever read, for its tone and his approach to combat and his desire to be a professional killer in order to do his patriotic duty. With a grudge, but no, like I said, no bone-deep hatred of the Japanese. It's just a really, really odd mixture. And for that alone, it's worthwhile for a different viewpoint. That's Commissioned in Battle by J. Gruenfeld. And then we're going to do Miraculous Torpedo Squadron by Juzo Mori. This was originally written in 1952 according to Juzo Mori's postscript. There is a 1973 foreword from Saburo Sakai, and then it was finally brought to English in 2016 electronically with a Canadian translator. Carrier pilot based aboard the Soryu. For the most part, he was pre-war trained, so he was one of the guys that was the hard cadre of the Japanese carrier pilot squadrons. So a lot of experience, especially with China. So he's got a lot of flight hours behind him. Very experienced. He loves that torpedo plane. He thinks it's kind of like a horse for him. He's really welded to the saddle. He was, of course, everyone was to be a fighter pilot initially, but once he was slotted into torpedo planes, he was fine with it. This is a very bizarre kind of memoir here. the tone is up and down, up and down. He's happy-go-lucky 1 minute, and then if his plane takes the slightest knock from flak or some kind of mechanical issue in the air, he's ready to kill himself. It's a very bizarre mixture. Along with the translation, I don't know whether this is a very good translation or whether this guy just wrote in a very bizarre fashion for Western minds to understand. It's not clear cut and straightforward like Saburo Sakai's own memoir is, but then he was assisted by an American translator, Martin Caden, I think, or somebody, Fred Satos, maybe. So it's got a very different feel because this was not done contemporaneously. It was translated later on without Juzo Mori's assistance. So it's got a very odd feel to it. Pre-war in China, he takes part at Pearl Harbor. He personally torpedoes the California, and that's the highlight of his career. He's very proud of himself for the training he endured and carried off the mission exceptionally well. He's at Midway. He's in the Indian Ocean raids. He got lucky at Midway because he was part of the first strike against the Ion itself. Gets back aboard and somehow makes it off the burning carrier after the American dive bombers counterattack. Very lucky to get out of that mess. Then he's transferred to the Juno and takes part in the Guadalcanal stuff, where he is eventually shot down, and his crewmen with him, somehow they make it to the island. They're close enough into shore, they make it to the island. His hand is wrecked in process by an American bullet, I believe, and is later amputated. And his portrayal of Starvation Island is pretty eye-opening and worth it in itself. You don't get that kind of Japanese perspective of how they were starving to death in the later stages of Guadalcanal. It's very very in your face and like, wow, this is crazy stuff. And that ends his career. He goes home to recoup in the hospital, and he's bitter about not being able to fly anymore. But then with the concurrent sense of relief that he got out of the meat grinder alive, all the kind of wild mix of emotion. And I think this is really essential, even though it's not well known. Or I had never heard it before. I just happened to stumble across it on Kindle. So I don't think this has a wide audience, but it's really short. And like I say, it's kind of bizarre at times, especially the title, The Miraculous Torpedo Squadron. I'm not quite sure how that translates culturally. What does it really mean? There's no explanation for it. It's just got an odd tone all the way around. But it's definitely worth hunting down, and for the paucity of Japanese memoirs, you've got to get a hold of this. So that's The Miraculous Torpedo Squadron by Juzo Mori. All right, then we come to the real problem child of the bunch here. Kamikaze by Yasuo Kuwuhara with the assistance of Gordon T. Allred. Originally published in 1507. 1982 revised edition. This is the reprint. This is the 50th anniversary edition. Note it says more than 500,000 copies sold, so they're going to brag about it. This is kind of like book zero for me. This is really the book zero. I had a couple in the grade school library that turned me on, but this was really the one that lit the fire for real. I had the original edition with a really 1960s kind of cover with a burning escort carrier from a kamikaze strike with American planes, on fire on the fantail. Real picture, not an illustration. This is the genericized reissue to make it kind of neutral, and a fanciful illustration of a Japanese aircraft there. All right, so Kuwuhara was allegedly 15 when he won the National Glider Championship of Japan in 1944 and was inducted into the Imperial Japanese Army Air Force as a pilot cadet trainee. He's enlisted, was following his brother's footsteps, but not in the Navy. He chooses or is chosen for the IJA. And then he undergoes the most brutal boot camp training montage you'll ever read, I think, with the ultimately sadistic DI. And the physical abuse inflicted on these trainees is just ludicrous. When you think you want to preserve these guys for their skill set and especially their eyesight, supposedly they have each other pummel the crap out of each other for discipline, to build discipline and team spirit. The abuses just go on and on and on. This is the most sadistic military in the world. You'd have to agree after reading this. And then the graduation to advanced training and the posting to a fighter squadron. It's early 45. Things aren't going well. We're not flying much because of fuel considerations, and he's not posted overseas in the IJA. Army Air Forces, if they weren't in New Guinea, they were in China, or they were based at home. So it's a lot of stationary stuff. And we get falling in love. We got his buddies being posted to a Kamikaze squadron. We get a shock announcement that the airbase he's at they ask for volunteers to be kamikaze, and those who don't raise their hands are actually the ones selected. So we got sleight of hand and dishonesty. We've got all kinds of crazy novelistic kind of stuff going on, and that's the key. So I took this as literal truth when I was a kid, because this raw exposure to this kind of story, like, yeah, it's real. This is just insane brutality. But as it turns out, it's a bunch of hooey, more than likely. So Gordon Ulrich kind of got busted out for this later on, and he defended it, saying, to the best of my knowledge, this is true. I met him at an air base during the occupation of Japan in 55, and this young man told me a story, and I wrote it down, interview style, and then we edited it together and pieced together, and I wrote it up in English and published it as a true account. To the best of my knowledge, it's a true account. I can't ask the guy anymore. He died suddenly in 1980. Well, fact finders and diggers after truth have gone on to bust him out, extensively. There's a obscure website I found that lists all the 10 major issues with the authenticity of this memoir, and it just destroys it. There's clues and hints here in the book. Once you're an adult and a critical reader, and having gone back through this now, like, oh my God, this is just red flags everywhere. So if you take this as a novel rather than a true to life memoir, I think you can still stomach it. So, there's no record of him being in the military. There are no photos. There's one photo I found on a website, supposedly him in a sort of uniform as a young man, but we don't know if it's actually Kuwuhara or not. And I'm not good on Japanese uniforms. I couldn't tell you what it looks. It could be like a mechanic. It's kind of like overalls more than like a normal uniform that we would think of Japanese military. So it's got all kinds of problems with it. And Gordon Ulrich said, he just couldn't get a hold of anybody to do any deep research on the reissue to show this one way or the other. I'm like, man, you don't have any contacts in Japan. You're based there in 55. You've got to know some research as a writer. You stayed in the writing field. You've got to know something. You could at least go ask his kids for a photo. They would surely have something, but nothing. There are no photos in here. In the revised edition, there's even a painful foreword by the publishers saying, there's been questions about the authenticity, but we feel that this is true, and we're going to bring it forward still as a nonfiction memoir, and with all good intent, we really feel this is the real deal. Well, that's corporate ballyhoo. Corporate statements are worth less than the paper they're written on. So dismiss that entirely. Is it worthwhile to read now, even as a novel? As war fiction? Yeah, it's so excessive and over top. You can see how it translates as a great war film that people would pick apart for the rivet counting. But you can see how it would have been a great film in the 70s or 80s. You couldn't do it now. And all CGI. There's no real airplanes left that you can put up in the sky. And I think the story is kind of passé now. It would have been a fine film in the 70s or 80s, but not now. Kind of disappointed by this, really. All these years later, even though it fired my interest in the war permanently, kind of disappointed to find out this is just not what it was portrayed to be. But it is a compelling read. However, innocence shredded. All right, so that's Obscure Memoirs for today in the CBI and PTO exclusively. Hope you found one of these you might want to chase down, if not more. And we'll come back again another time and do another topic. Meanwhile, I am the General Douglas MacArthur. I'm going to conquer the Philippines. I'm going to take over Japan and rule as my own kind of style of emperor. And after that, I'm going to just fade away. Until next time, happy reading.